Every time you react, they win. But every time you remain calm, they lose their grip, their direction, their control. Think about it, you don't need to yell, you don't need to argue, you don't even need to cut them off. Because toxic people don't feed on your presence, they feed on your reaction. Their survival isn't about being near you, it's about pulling energy out of you. The real power, it isn't found in fighting back, it's in becoming so calm, so centered, so unshakable that no storm can reach you. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been." That is the core of true resilience. We're not simply talking about surviving toxic people. We're talking about becoming untouchable, not by locking them out of your life, but by locking the gate to your own mind. So let's begin with a hard truth that most people don't want to face. Toxic people are not your biggest problem. Your reaction to them is, you can quit your job, cut ties with a friend, move across cities, even go no contact with family. But here's the secret. No one tells you if you haven't mastered your emotional discipline, someone new will trigger you in the exact same way. You can change your environment 10 times over, but if your emotional immune system stays weak, you'll keep falling into the same trap. That's why so many people remain stuck believing that external change will fix an internal weakness. But Epictetus said it best. It's not things that upset us, but our judgments about them. Toxic people only carry as much power as you hand over. Their weapon is not their voice, not their insults, it's your reaction to those words. They don't win because they're stronger. They win because you haven't trained yourself to be mentally stronger. Let's ground this in a real-world example. Imagine a colleague, we'll call her Karen. In every meeting, she makes subtle jabs, digs that sting in ways no one else notices. She leans in with comments like, "Well, some of us double-check the reports." Everyone laughs. You know it's about you. Your stomach twists, your chest tightens, and instantly you want to snap back. You want to prove yourself. But here's the shift. You don't. Instead, you take a breath. You meet her eyes not with anger, but with unshakable stillness. Your voice remains level, your body stays relaxed, and you keep speaking with clarity, focus, and control. That's not weakness, that's mastery. That's emotional intelligence in action. That's stoicism alive in the room. And what happens next? Karen escalates. She jabs harder. She raises her voice. Why? Because your calmness exposes her chaos. People like Karen don't actually want truth, they want attention. And when you stop reacting, you stop being her audience. Without your reaction, her performance falls flat. This matters more than most people realize. Because too many live like emotional puppets, strings pulled by anyone who knows where to press. One sarcastic comment ruins their day. One toxic text spirals into hours of overthinking. One manipulative guilt trip makes them question their worth. But here's what the Stoics taught. No one controls your mind unless you hand them the keys. You don't owe explanations. You don't need to defend your character. You don't need to win arguments. What you do need, what you must build, is discipline. In the last part, we uncovered the truth. Toxic people don't actually win because they're powerful. They win because of how we react. And that's where discipline comes in. Discipline to stay calm in the face of provocation. Discipline to choose peace over petty fights. Discipline to protect your energy as if your life depends on it, because in many ways it truly does. Here's the key takeaway. The smartest way to deal with toxic people isn't to fight them, it's to starve them. Starve them of your attention. Starve them of your emotions. Starve them of your energy. Because toxic people don't feed on logic, they feed on reactions. They thrive when you overthink. They manipulate when you crave validation, cut off the supply, and they vanish. Real mental strength isn't about being loud, it's about being silent. It's the ability to remain still in a room filled with chaos. It's the power to let someone's storm pass right through you without leaving a single scratch. You don't need to change them. You just need to change how much access they have to you. And that transformation begins with your response, or more importantly, your lack of one. The moment you stop reacting, you stop bleeding power, and that's the moment you become dangerous in the best, most unshakable way. Now let's make one thing clear. Toxic people are not powerful. They don't hold some secret weapon. They're not brilliant strategists. They don't possess anything. You don't accept one thing practice. They've spent years, maybe their entire lives, perfecting the art of emotional manipulation. They know exactly which tones spark guilt, which silences provoke anxiety, and which buttons trigger insecurity. And here's the scary part, they don't even need to think about it anymore. It's instinct. It's muscle memory. Meanwhile, you're simply reacting, not because you're weak, but because you've never been trained. Think of it like this: if you step into a boxing ring with a trained fighter, you're going to get hit hard, and often. Not because they're a monster, but because you never learned how to block, how to dodge, how to move with skill. It's the same with toxic people. You're walking into an emotional battlefield without armor, without preparation, without strategy, and then you wonder why you end up bruised. But here's what separates Stoics from everyone else: they don't blame the opponent. They train for the battle. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." That's the essence of Stoicism, because if one careless comment can ruin your mood, if a single message can derail your entire day, then the issue isn't them, it's your lack of emotional discipline. And here's a real-world truth you've probably noticed. Toxic people repeat themselves over and over again. You forgive them, they do it again. You explain yourself, they twist your words again. You show vulnerability, they weaponize it against you again. It's not miscommunication, it's not coincidence, it's a pattern, a program they've mastered. But here's the mistake most people make: you keep trying new strategies. You argue, you explain, you avoid, you overthink, and every time you're still reacting, you're still playing their game. Because you're operating from emotional chaos, not clarity, until one day you stop responding, you stop defending, you stop needing to be understood, and in that moment, everything shifts. You move from prey to presence. You step out of their game and start writing your own rules. This is what it means to train the mind like a warrior. Ask any high-performance athlete, any soldier, any leader. The truth is, the same strength is not inherited. Strength is trained, and mental strength is no different. In the last part, we discovered that strength is not inherited, it's trained. And the training ground isn't in books or motivational clips. It happens in the heat of the moment when someone tries to provoke you and you refuse to break. You don't build emotional immunity by scrolling through quotes or watching endless speeches. You build it in the exact instant your patience is tested. You build it the moment someone disrespects you, and instead of snapping, you breathe. Instead of lashing out, you stay composed. Each time you want to explode but choose stillness instead, you forge self-mastery. That is emotional intelligence in its purest, rawest form. And make no mistake, this discipline is not softness. It's terrifying to those who thrive on chaos. Why? Because when you stop playing their game, they lose control. And when they lose control over you, they lose their illusion of power. The truth is simple: toxic people aren't powerful. They've just practiced their dysfunction longer than you've practiced your discipline. But the moment you decide to train to master your reactions, to sharpen your self-worth, to elevate your inner world above external drama, that's the moment you become untouchable. You're not fragile, you're simply untrained. And training begins today. Let's cut through the noise, every emotional outburst. It's a crack in your discipline. Every time someone pulls a reaction from you, whether it's anger, sadness, or defensiveness, they're not just drawing emotion, they're draining your power. Because in that moment, you're not standing in your truth, you're abandoning your center. You've handed the remote control of your emotions to someone who doesn't even respect your peace. Epictetus put it bluntly: any person capable of angering you becomes your master. Read that again. Every time you let them provoke you, you give them ownership of your mind. Now let's address a common myth: the illusion of standing up for yourself. Many people believe that if you don't react, if you don't shout back, defend yourself, or prove your side, you're weak. They think silence equals surrender. But that's wrong. Reacting isn't strength. Reacting is a reflex. And reflexes aren't conscious power, they're conditioning. The Stoic approach isn't passive, it's powerful. It's the choice to respond, not to react. It's the decision to place logic over chaos, intention over impulse. That's what true mental strength looks like. That's the mindset of high performers. The discipline not to be dragged into every emotional brawl just to feel validated. Let's bring this into real life. Imagine your partner after a long day throws a passive-aggressive comment. Must be nice to only think about yourself. The old version of you, you'd snap back, you'd raise your voice, you'd pull up old arguments, dig into old wounds. Hours gone, energy wasted, but the trained version of you pauses. You ask yourself, what outcome do I really want here? Peace or proof? And instead of exploding, you calmly say, let's talk when we're both ready to actually listen. No war, no shouting match, just quiet strength. That's not weakness, that's not avoidance, that's strategy. That's executive-level emotional intelligence in action. And now let's tackle the root of it all, the ego trap. Most people never realize this. We don't react because the other person is right. We react because our ego is fragile. We feel insulted and we crave validation. We feel attacked and we scramble to defend. We feel misunderstood and we beg to be seen. But here's the truth. Your peace cannot depend on external perception. If it does, you'll be emotionally bankrupt every single time someone disapproves of you. Marcus Aurelius put it beautifully. You always own the option of having no opinion. Think about that. You don't have to explain. You don't have to defend. You don't even have to engage. In the last section, we exposed the ego trap, how reacting isn't strength but surrender. And that's where the next level of mastery begins. You don't even have to care what they think. That's not indifference, that's spiritual discipline. Here's the takeaway. Every time you react emotionally to a toxic person, you reinforce their illusion of control. You hand them the reward they're craving. They don't want truth, they want chaos. They want your fire, your anger, your outburst. But when you stay calm, not cold, not dismissive, simply centered, you flip the entire dynamic. You stop playing their game, and the moment you stop playing, they lose. Emotional control is not suppression, it's selection. It's the art of choosing where your energy goes. And most of what toxic people say, it doesn't deserve a single drop of it. So the next time someone tries to pull you into their storm pause, breathe, own the moment, master the space. Because the most dangerous person in any room isn't the one shouting the loudest, it's the one who chooses silence with intention. In a world addicted to noise, silence is almost always mistaken for surrender. But if you truly understand power, real power, you know that the strongest presence in a room is often the one who speaks the least. We've been conditioned to equate silence with defeat. If you don't clap back, you lost. If you don't explain yourself, they win. If you don't speak up, you're weak. But the truth? Silence isn't passive. Silence is strategic. Silence is stoic. It's the conscious decision not to hand your energy over to chaos. Here's the psychology of silence. Toxic. People are addicted to reaction. They thrive on drama. They survive on your words, your explanations, your defenses, your long speeches. Why? Because it gives them roles to play the victim, the martyr, the misunderstood genius. But when you stop talking, you cut the script. Suddenly they have no stage. They scramble. They raise their voice. They lash out harder. Why? Because your silence exposes their emptiness. Seneca once said, "He who does not know how to be silent does not know how to speak." In other words, until you master restraint, your words carry no real weight. Silence, far from weakness, is emotional intelligence in motion. Let's ground this with a real-life power move. Imagine you're at a family dinner. That one uncle, the one who always turns you into the punchline, leans in with a smirk and says, "Still single." Maybe you're just too picky for your own good. The table laughs. All eyes turn to you. Heat rises in your chest. The old version of you would snap back with a sarcastic jab. Maybe you'd storm out. Maybe you'd launch into yet another explanation of your choices. But the trained version of you, you don't bite. You sip your drink. You smile not with bitterness but with peace. And you say nothing. You let the comment hang awkwardly in the air where it belongs. You stay calm, you stay composed, and in that moment you dominate the room without raising your voice. That is mental toughness. That is spiritual clarity. That is the energy of someone who's done playing small to please others. And here's why silence scares toxic people. It forces them to face themselves. They can't stand it when their bait doesn't work, when you don't flinch, when you don't justify, when you don't react. Because suddenly they're left alone with something they've avoided their entire lives, the noise inside their own head. Silence makes people confront themselves, and those who can't bear that confrontation will always try to drag noise out of you. But you are no longer here to be noise. You are here to be clarity, to be stillness, to be discipline, to be power. Take away silence doesn't mean you're ignoring the issue. It means you've chosen the higher ground. In the last section, we saw why silence isn't avoidance, it's power. It's not that you ignore the issue, it's that you refuse to give it life. You don't need to clap back. You don't need to prove a single thing. You don't need to meet them on their level because you're no longer on their level. Let fools argue. Let the undisciplined shout. Let the empty provoke. The wise man watches. The strong one waits. And your silence isn't fear. It's training. You are silent because you've built yourself for peace. And that is not weakness. That is the highest form of strength. Here's the paradox: the calmer you become, the more chaotic they get. At first, your silence confuses them, then it irritates them, and eventually it terrifies them. Why? Because toxic people don't actually fear confrontation, they fear irrelevance. And the moment you stop reacting, stop engaging, stop explaining something, clicks inside them. They realize they don't control you anymore. And that is the one thing they never expected. Think of it this way. Toxic people are like fire. They need oxygen to burn. Your anger. Oxygen. Your guilt. Oxygen. Your desperate need to be understood. Oxygen, but when you stop feeding that fire, it flickers. And in that flicker, something unsettling happens. They feel their grip slipping. That's when they escalate. They say crueler things. They twist the narrative even harder. They reach into your past and drag it back into the present. They insult what you love. They stab at the scars you've already healed. They try to rip open what you've fought to forget. It's not personal, it's tactical. They're losing ground and they know it. That's why they panic. Because without your pain, they have no leverage. Without your reaction, they are nothing. Here's a real-life example. Think of someone who once had emotional power over you, an ex, a parent, a so-called friend. Every time they reached out, you spiraled. Anger, confusion, guilt. They pressed a button and you collapsed into the same old cycle. But then one day you don't respond. No explanation, no apology, no long message to soften the blow, just silence. And suddenly they panic, they double text, they play the victim, they accuse you of changing, of being cold, of acting brand new. But make no mistake, they're not checking in. They're checking your boundaries. They're testing whether your peace is real or just temporary. And this is where most people crack. They confuse chaos with connection. They think, if they're fighting for my attention, it must mean they care. But Stoics know better. Stoics don't mistake noise for love. They understand the storm always grows loudest right before it dies. Here's the deeper psychological truth: they are no longer dealing with the same version of you. They're arguing with your old self, the one who needed validation, who feared rejection, who explained everything just to keep the peace. But that version of you is gone. Now they're standing face to face with stillness. And stillness is a mirror. It reflects back everything they've avoided in themselves: emptiness, insecurity, weakness. And that is what truly terrifies them. In the last part, we learned that toxic people fear one thing above all else, not your anger, but your indifference. Because when you no longer serve as their emotional punching bag, they're left with no choice but to face their own instability. And they hate that. Here's the takeaway. Toxic people aren't afraid of your words. They're afraid of your detachment. They're not shaken by your shouting. They're shaken by your silence. Because once you build a mindset rooted in peace, resilience, and inner discipline, they can't reach you anymore. So let them shout. Let them twist. Let them burn themselves out. Your only job is to stay calm, Stay grounded, stay gone. Because the moment you become unshakable, they panic, they scramble, they realize the game is over. And that's when you truly win, not with revenge, but with silence. And remember this, toxic people aren't performers by accident. They're performers by design. They craft drama as if it were theater. They rehearse guilt trips like it's dialogue. They live for tension, for a confrontation, for the scene. But here's the secret. No one tells you they cannot perform without an audience. The moment you stop clapping, stop watching, stop reacting, the curtain falls, the play ends. The show can only go on if you stay in your seat. Let's bring this to life. Imagine someone in your world who always finds a way to dominate the room. At family gatherings, they make sly, backhanded comments. At work, they stir conflict and then step into the victim role. They thrive on chaos noise and, above all, your attention. Whether it's positive or negative, it fuels them, because your reaction validates their role. But what if you walked away mid-scene? What if you didn't raise your voice, didn't take the bait, didn't give them the reaction they were hunting for? What happens then? They stutter, they stumble, they look around for another target because their power never came from what they said. It came from how much of yourself you handed over in response. The Stoics warned us clearly, a man who provokes you owns you, and the antidote is not confrontation, it's absence. Think of your emotional energy as a currency. Your attention is not neutral, it's valuable. And toxic people are emotional thieves. They know how to push just enough to make you spend that energy on them. They don't want peace, they don't want resolution, they want a stage, and they want you to keep buying tickets to their show. But the moment you realize that not everyone deserves a front row seat in your life, everything shifts. You begin to manage your peace the way a top executive manages their time, carefully, intentionally, with boundaries. You stop explaining, you stop justifying, you stop performing for their approval. And what's left? Stillness, clarity, control. Let's take a real-world example. You're texting with someone who always knows how to push your buttons. They disappear for days, then suddenly drop a vague, manipulative line. Wow, didn't expect you to act like this. The old you would never. The old version of you. You'd send paragraphs, you'd defend yourself, you'd spiral into overthinking. But the new you don't respond. Not with anger, not with sarcasm, not with explanation, just silence. And here's the key, it's not ghosting. It's emotional detachment with intention. It's stepping out of the role they wrote for you, and it's one of the most powerful skills you'll ever master. So here's the final takeaway. Toxic people crave validation through drama. They bait you with guilt. They manipulate with silence. They test you with passive aggression. But you're no longer a spectator. You've left the theater. You've walked off the stage. Let them perform for someone else, because your piece is not a prop. Your life is not their drama. And your mind, it is no longer their audience. In the last section, we saw how walking away from the performance strips toxic people of their stage. But here's the deeper truth. Even when the curtain falls and you've left the room, the real question is, have you left them behind in your mind? In the Stoic world, power is never loud. It isn't shouting, arguing, or proving yourself. True power is quiet refusal. It's the silent exit from a show you never auditioned for. And when the curtain finally drops, you're already gone. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Few want to admit you can block their number, delete their photos, even move across the country. But if they still live inside your thoughts, they still win. Because it was never just about physical distance. It was always about emotional attachment. You don't cut a toxic person off simply by walking away. You cut them off by walking free inside yourself. The mind, that's the real battlefield. Think about how often this happens. You hear someone say, I haven't spoken to them in months, but I still can't stop replaying what they said. Or maybe I blocked them, but I still wonder if I was the problem. That isn't freedom. That's captivity. That's mental chains. The hard truth is, they don't need to be present in your life to control you. They just need to rent space in your head. And most people keep paying that rent month after month. But Stoicism teaches something radical. Freedom is not the absence of people, it's the absence of internal slavery. Let's break it down with real life. Imagine you finally cut ties with someone who drained you emotionally for years. No more texts, no more arguments, no more fights. Externally, the connection is gone, but then your mind betrays you. You start replaying old conversations. You question your decisions. You feel guilt even when you were the one who was hurt. What's happening? You didn't cut the attachment, you only cut the access, but you left the bond alive. You're still chasing their imaginary approval, still waiting for an apology that will never come, still hoping that one day they'll wake up and admit you were right. But here's the brutal truth they already know. They just don't care. And once you accept that, truly accept it, you reclaim every inch of your emotional power. Letting go does not mean losing. People fear detachment because it feels like surrender, like defeat, like giving up. But Stoics know better. They don't let go to lose, they let go to win inwardly. Detachment is not cold, it's clear. It's choosing not to chase closure from those committed to misunderstanding you. It's saying, I don't need one last conversation. I don't need one last explanation. I don't need you to admit anything. I choose peace. What you really need is self-worth that doesn't rely on external recognition. You need the emotional discipline to say, I am no longer available for this cycle. Because here's the real takeaway: cutting someone off is easy. But cutting off the replay in your head, the rumination, the guilt, the endless what-ifs, that's where the real battle begins. True detachment is when you no longer need their reaction to validate your peace. When they become just a chapter, not the entire book. When their name surfaces in conversation and you feel nothing, no anger, no longing, no sting. That is freedom. To be free is to no longer be haunted. And the very moment you cut that invisible string, not with hate, not with revenge, but with clarity and self-respect, that's when you truly finally walk away. Because here's the reality: toxic people only ever held power over you for one reason. Not because they were smarter, not because they were stronger, and certainly not because they were right. In the last section, we uncovered a hard truth: toxic people don't hold power because they're right. They hold power because a part of you still craves their approval. You want them to recognize your effort. You want them to admit they were wrong. You want them to validate your goodness and say, you didn't deserve that. But here's the truth most people avoid: you don't need their approval. You need your own respect. At the root of all manipulation lies one thing: emotional dependency. Toxic people don't manipulate with facts, they manipulate through your hunger for validation. They sense your insecurities and aim straight at them. They dangle approval like a prize and then snatch it away when you don't conform. And when charm doesn't work, they switch tactics using silent sarcasm or guilt as weapons. It's not because they misunderstand you. It's because they know exactly what keeps you hooked. And what keeps you hooked is the illusion that if you just tried harder, if you just gave more, they would finally treat you right. But let's be clear, that illusion isn't love. It's control. And every moment you chase their approval, you're essentially putting your self-worth up for sale. Now pause and reflect. Think back to the last time someone hurt you emotionally. Deep down, you knew they crossed the line. You knew you didn't deserve it. But instead of walking away, what did you do? You explained yourself. You pleaded. You waited for a maybe. Why? Because you believed that if they approved of you again, you'd finally feel okay. But here's the Stoic reality. No one can give you self-worth. It cannot be borrowed. It must be built. Their approval isn't peace, it's a drug, temporary, unreliable, and dangerously addictive. One moment it lifts you, the next it destroys you. So what does real self-respect look like? It's not loud. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't announce itself to the world. True self-respect is quiet, steady, unshakable. It's the ability to walk away without making a scene. It's not replying to that manipulative message, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. It's recognizing that you do not need to be understood by people who are committed to misunderstanding you. And once you truly internalize this, everything changes. You stop seeking closure. You stop fighting to be seen. You stop lowering your standards just to keep a connection alive. You no longer trade your peace for someone else's comfort. That's the Stoic alternative to approval. The Stoics never begged for recognition. They never chased external praise. They anchored themselves to virtue, not validation. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Ambition means tying your well-being to what other people say or do. Sanity means tying it to your own actions. Approval is unstable. It can be given, it can be taken away. But self-respect is internal, it's non-negotiable, it's untouchable. You build it every time you hold your boundary, even when it's lonely. You strengthen it every time you choose silence instead of arguing. You protect it every time you walk away with your dignity intact, and no one, absolutely no one, can take that from you." Here's the final takeaway. You don't need them to tell you that you're enough. You need to believe it long before they ever do, and especially if they never will. You don't need their attention. You need to stop giving them the power to decide who. In the last section, we realized that true strength doesn't come from their approval, it comes from your self-respect. And when you stop chasing validation, something powerful happens. You stop performing. You don't need their applause. You don't need their recognition. You need to stop putting on a show just to be accepted. Because the moment you choose self-respect over approval, the chains fall off. You stop being controlled. You stop being manipulated. You stop bending yourself into a mold that was never made for you. And in that moment, you begin to feel whole again. Not because they finally gave you what you always longed for, but because you gave it to yourself. Let's be honest, you've been hurt. Not just annoyed, not just frustrated, wounded. Wounded by someone who knew exactly how to cut you and chose to do it anyway. Maybe it was betrayal. Maybe it was manipulation. Maybe it was the slow erosion of your self-worth at the hands of someone who swore they cared. Whatever it was, you carry the scar. And here's the question that changes everything. What will you do with it? Pain can be a tool if you learn to use it, but most people get trapped in one of two cycles. They either suppress the pain, pretending it never happened, or they stay stuck inside it, replaying the wound again and again, waiting for closure that never comes. But Stoicism teaches a third path transformation. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What stands in the way becomes the way." In other words, you don't avoid the pain. You face it. You study it. You learn from it. And then you use it to sharpen yourself. This is the power of constructive rage. Because there are two kinds of rage, the kind that destroys and the kind that rebuilds. When you channel your pain into anger, bitterness, or revenge, it poisons you. But when you channel it into clarity, discipline, and direction, it becomes fuel. You don't scream back, you build in silence. You don't argue for validation, you validate yourself through results, through progress, through mastery. You take every ounce of rejection, every ounce of shame, every ounce of being overlooked, and you turn it into momentum. That's not denial. That's emotional alchemy. Let me give you a real-life example. Imagine being in a relationship where your worth was constantly questioned, where you were made to feel like love had to be earned, like your best was never enough. You broke, you begged, you tried harder, and still you were left empty. But now you train, you heal, you rise. You build a life so powerful, so peaceful, so purpose-driven that they become nothing more than a footnote in your story, not the headline. You stop living in reaction. You start living in rebirth. And no, it's not about proving them wrong. It's about proving to yourself that they never had the final say in who you would become. Because pain can do two things. It can refine you or it can define you. Pain is inevitable. But what it turns you into, that is your choice. Toxic people want your pain to define you. They want it to leave you stuck, doubting, unfinished, small. But when you take that pain and use it as fire, when you forge discipline, clarity, and spiritual strength from it, you become something untouchable. Something far more dangerous than anger. You become the person who can say with certainty, "I survived you. I grew from what you tried to break, and now I am someone you can no longer reach." That is real power. Here's the takeaway. The pain they caused is not your shame, it's your source code. It's the proof that you didn't quit. It's the beginning of your higher self. So don't hide from it. Don't run from it. Don't drown in it. Use it. Turn it into strength. Turn it into standards. Turn it into silence so loud it echoes as success. Because your best revenge was never reaction, it was always your evolution. In the last part, we learned that pain can either define you or refine you, and when you transform it, you become untouchable. Now here's the final step, the most powerful thing you can do, is nothing. No comeback, no emotional outburst. No need to explain, defend, or convince, just calm, just stillness, just silence. Because the moment you stop reacting, you stop handing over the one thing toxic people truly feed on: control. Real power isn't loud. Real power isn't dominance. It isn't the sharpest words or the strongest reaction. Real power, Stoic power, doesn't shout. It observes. It waits. It refuses to be moved. Epictetus once said, "If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation." In other words, no one can truly shake you unless you agree to be shaken, and once you fully grasp that, you become unreachable. Let's bring this down to real life. You get a text message full of blame, manipulation, maybe even guilt, the old you. You'd panic. You'd type paragraphs, you'd cry, you'd explain, you'd defend. But the new you pause. You recognize the trap, you read it once, and then you don't respond. Not out of bitterness, not out of avoidance, but because you've outgrown the level where that conversation even exists. That's not weakness, that's not avoidance, that's conscious mastery. Non-reaction is not indifference, it's discipline. It's the sign of someone who has trained their nervous system, studied their triggers, rebuilt their identity. Not to suppress emotion, but to refuse to be enslaved by it. This is the kind of mental discipline that turns chaos into clarity. The kind of spiritual resilience that calmly says, "I don't need to win, I just need to stay free." And here lies the final lesson. Toxic people don't disappear because you fight them. They disappear the moment they realize they can no longer reach you. That turning point doesn't come from revenge, anger, or proving yourself. It comes from the quietest shift of all non-reaction, the choice not to answer the insult, the decision to remain silent in the storm, the refusal to make your inner peace negotiable. Because the moment you stop reacting, you stop bleeding power, you stop playing their game, you stop being controlled, and that's when you become dangerous in the best possible way. You rise, you thrive, you stay calm. And they fade into background noise, because the smartest way to deal with toxic people was never to beat them. It was to become someone they could no longer touch. So now you know the strongest strategy isn't revenge, it isn't endless arguments, it isn't proving your worth to someone who never valued it in the first place. The real strategy is becoming untouchable, not because you blocked them, not because you burned bridges, but because you built a fortress within yourself, one no one can break through. You didn't destroy them. You didn't even need to. You simply chose not to let them live inside your head rent-free. And in doing so, you became something rare, something unshakable, someone who no longer